Okay, guys, I did just in fact film and record basically about half of this podcast and then realized that my microphone wasn't turned on. So fun. Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of the Grid Girls Formula. I am your host Zoe and today we're going to be talking through everything Monaco Grand Prix. We're also going to be doing a technical tidbit on pit stops and how those kind of work and how they operate from an engineering perspective, and then we're going to do a little preview for the Spanish Grand Prix, which is coming this next weekend. And as I mentioned, I literally just filmed all of this, so hopefully this will be the best podcast ever because I've just rehearsed it. Before we even get into the race, a couple of things to note. First of all, McLaren had a really cool livery this week that is with their partner OKX, and it's a nod to the iconic M7A race car while also drawing some inspiration from the Riviera where they are racing, and that is going to be on the car. It was obviously on the car in Monaco. I believe it's also going to be on the car in Spain, so that is cool to see a nod to their roots. And of course, for the Pirelli tire choice for this week, they're using the C6, C5, and C4 tires. And also, another important thing to note about the Monaco Grand Prix this weekend, they instituted a new rule which basically said that each of the teams have to have 2 pit stops throughout the race, which is just supposed to add a little bit more strategy to it and hopefully make the race a little bit more interesting, because Monaco is a track that is really hard to overtake on, and so it can kind of lead to a little bit of a more boring race, unfortunately, which stinks because it is such a historic track and so much part of Formula One and its culture. And I mean, I would kill to go to a Monaco Grand Prix just for the sake of being in Monte Carlo and experiencing that whole culture. So it's definitely not one that they want to drop off the calendar, but if they can't make it more interesting, they're going to struggle to kind of have a reason to keep it there. Okay, so let's hop into our review of the Monaco Grand Prix. Starting with free practice, you guys know I don't really like watching free practice, but this was a little bit more of an exciting one. So during FP1, Leclerc actually had a lot of drama during FP1. He locked up at one point, went into the runoff area, and then a little bit later he was going on a quick lap and Stroll kind of just got in his way and he ran right into him. I think Stroll didn't realize that a blue flag had been waved or something there, or hadn't gotten communication from his race engineer, so there was this little bit of miscommunication there. Luckily, Leclerc was able, I believe, to get back to the pits or to clean up his car before he actually still came in as the fastest person in FP1, which is always very exciting. I love that the Ferraris actually did a decent job this weekend. So at the end of FP1, we had Leclerc, Verstappen, and Norris. Then during FP2, a little bit of drama continued with how tight this track is. I think I said it last week, but I want to say it was Nelson Piquet who equated driving around this track to riding a bicycle around your living room. So there is just not a lot of room. Hadjar actually clipped the inside barrier on his way into the Nouvelle Chicane, which ripped the left rear tire off of its rim. Piastri also brought out the red flags pretty shortly after he hit the barrier head-on at Saint-Devote, which is definitely less than ideal. And it's kind of crazy because I feel like we don't often see Piastri making a mistake like that. There actually a little bit of an interesting moment as well. Behrman actually overtook, I believe it was Sainz, after the red flag had already been thrown. And I think he was trying to claim that it was safer for him. He did get a little bit of a delayed message from his team, but he did get the little flashing sign on his car, and you can see it in the replay. He should have been aware that there was a red flag, but he still overtook Sainz, which is it's just weird. And I don't really understand his reasoning either. He said that he felt like it would have been more dangerous for him to slow down in that moment, which obviously I'm not a racing driver. I don't know every single in and out of this situation, but what happens in a red flag is there's been a pretty major incident. You don't necessarily know where that might be, and you need to be slowing down immediately, otherwise you might also be involved in an incident. You don't want to make it any worse than what it already is. So I don't fully understand his reasoning as to why he thought that overtaking in that moment was better. Also, it was free practice, so oh well. He did get a 10-place grid penalty for that, but he's trying, but he's not doing wonderfully. So he's probably going to be at the back of the grid anyway. So a 10-place grid penalty doesn't really mean that much. More of just a warning to everybody else to not do that, you know? At the end of FP2, we had Leclerc, Piastri, and Hamilton as our 3 fastest. And then in FP3, a lot of the drivers kind of took their time getting out there. They were complaining a little bit about grip. Hamilton actually tried out the soft tires and was just not happy. He kept complaining about the rear sliding around. They were complaining about some traffic and stuff. Hamilton, who actually set the 5th fastest time in this session, he came to a stop at Casino Square after he hit a barrier. And yeah, the team had to kind of deal with all of that damage, and that kind of red flagged the session and ended it for everybody. So at the end of FP3, we had Leclerc, Verstappen, and Norris as our 3 fastest individuals. Moving on to qualifying. So qualifying at Monaco is arguably more entertaining than the race itself. As I mentioned, they've tried to add this spice with the 2-stop, which we'll get more into later. But I don't think they're going to be able to change the fact that Monaco is won on the Saturday during qualifying. It is just so hard to overtake at this track that it just doesn't happen that much. I also do have to take a minute to just admire the different camera angles and the things that we were able to see. Like, Monaco looks gorgeous, first of all. Like, I would kill to go to Monaco. But also, like, there are so many good camera angles here. Like, you can see the elevation changes. They even had, like, a drone from above that, like, was so stable. I was like, that's insane how they are able to do that. And it just is another moment where you realize how many other advances in technology are being used and played out with on the world of Formula One. Like, it's just cool. There was a little bit of an incident between Gasly and Stroll. Gasly was basically trying to set his fastest lap, and Stroll, again, got in his way. I guess Stroll just had a thing of doing that this weekend. I do usually try to be nice to Stroll and give him the benefit of the doubt in a lot of these situations, but he really did get in people's way this weekend. He really needed to sort that out. But it sucks that the Alpine went out because of that, you know? He wasn't able to set a faster time. Antonelli also hit a wall, which sucks because even though he got into Q2, he was not able to participate in Q2, which really sucks for the Mercedes, particularly because of what happened to George in Q2 as well, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Hamilton actually blocked Verstappen at one point, so Hamilton got a grid place penalty for that. I knew it was going to annoy Verstappen. He was on the radio like, what the heck? It wasn't that deep. It was Q1. They were both through. It's okay. Luckily, everybody was fine. There was no issue with that, but Hamilton still got penalized for it, which is probably valid. Knocked out in Q1, we had Bortolesso, Behrman, Gasly, Stroll, and Colapinto. So then we had Q2, and as I alluded to before, George Russell lost power and just kind of came to a stop in the tunnel, which was actually kind of a really inconvenient place for him to stop. So they had to red flag the session, and then they had all of the marshals come out, and they were like pushing him. It was actually kind of cool. Like, I think they like pushed him for a while, and then they like swapped people, and they like kept pushing him, and Russell was like in the car like steering it. I don't know, it looked like a fun time. I was like, if I was a marshal, like that's the kind of thing that I'd want to do. Like that's just cool. Most of my notes that I have for Q2 is basically Tsunoda's struggling, Sainz is struggling, is Hadjar going to make it into Q3? He was really pushing. And also, Ocon made it through to Q2, which was exciting because we got to hear Laura Mueller on the radio. She is Esteban Ocon's race engineer, and it's really just, it's nice to hear a woman on the radio. I love hearing that. Knocked out in Q2, we had Sainz, Tsunoda, Hülkenberg, Russell, and Antonelli. I just felt for the Mercedes. There was one moment during the race, I'm jumping ahead again, but there was a moment during the race where the camera just had a view on Toto Wolff, and he just gave the biggest side eye I've ever seen. He was literally just like, are you kidding me? Because they were just not having it with the way that all of the strategy and things went down during the race. It was just very frustrating for everybody, I think, on that track. Not the kind of race that we were hoping to see. Moving into Q3, I really thought that Leclerc was going to get on pole. All I wanted was Leclerc on pole, but I will take the second place that he wound up getting. That's tolerable. That's doable. That's so much better than what the Ferraris were doing. But at the end of the day, like, Charles Leclerc at Monaco is a different beast. Like, he is attacking that thing like nobody else. He knows those streets like the back of his hand. It is crazy to think that, like, the commentators mentioned something during the race about the fact that no other racing driver has a home Grand Prix in the way that Charles Leclerc has a home Grand Prix. Like, he is riding around literally the streets of his hometown. Sure, like, if you go to England, like, you have Silverstone, if you're in Japan, whatever, like, anywhere you go, like, yeah, like, they may be in their home country, but that doesn't mean that they are literally driving around the roads that they grew up on. Like, that is just something else and so cool. So I was really hoping Leclerc would win this weekend. So I was a little sad about it, but again, better than it has been for Ferrari, so I will take it. I was a little bit nervous about the McLarens. Obviously, Norris was able to get on pole, but Piastri couldn't quite go faster than Leclerc, so we had Piastri in third. And then we also had Hadjar in fifth, which is really exciting. I think that it just goes to show how impressive Hadjar has been this season. Like, he has been pretty darn consistent. He's been able to get up there. He has been kind of killing it overall. I think he's gotten into Q3 every single race. I think he's the only driver who has been able to do that this season. I could be wrong. I'll have to double check that, but pretty crazy. So in the end, for our final qualifying, which winds up being a little bit different of a setup for the race because of various grid penalties, but we wound up with Norris on pole, Leclerc, Piastri, Hamilton, Verstappen, Hadjar, Alonso, Ocon, Lawson, and Albon as our top 10. But Hamilton had, I believe, a 3-place grid penalty due to that whole impeding of Verstappen earlier on in the practice. Okay, now we can talk about the race. So even though the race was honestly not like the most thrilling situation, I have a lot of thoughts. So obviously, like I mentioned, this whole 2-stop idea was supposed to add a lot more spice to the weekend, something different, make sure we're not just watching everybody trail after each other. And I think the concept was a decent concept. The way that the strategy played out for a lot of these teams didn't do Formula One justice the way that it should have. Basically, what wound up happening was a lot of the teammates, particularly I think it was the Racing Bulls and then the 2 Williams drivers, where they essentially had one person be a scapegoat, one of the teammates. So for the Racing Bulls, they had Hadjar a little bit further up on the grid, and they had Lawson behind him. And they basically told Lawson, drive slowly, hold everybody up so that we can create a bigger gap, not lose as many places whenever we go to do our pit stop. And then they're able to guarantee that at least one of them stays up in the points. And then the Williams did basically the same thing as well. And they had Albon driving slowly and Sainz driving slowly at various points in the race to be able to give the other one an advantage. And it just meant that the whole pack got so scrunched up behind them, and they were literally just driving slowly because I can't get around them. And it's just like, that's not the point of Formula One. Like, we want to watch a race. We want to watch people go fast, push these cars to the limit, and that just really wasn't what happened this weekend. And that, again, I already said, like, it sucks that that's the case. Anyway, now that my little rant is over, and I will talk about a couple other little bits and pieces as we go along, but going back to the opening lap of the race, I was actually pretty surprised. Like, Norris locked up at the beginning. I do not know how Leclerc did not get around him. I was like, why did you not get around him? Because that was the moment, because on that start line was the time to pull a move. Like, that is the only time when everybody's going to be bunched up enough where you've got a little bit more free air to be able to, like, get ahead. But alas, that did not happen, and everybody pretty much stayed pretty similar positions, I think, in that opening lap. Antonelli was trying to get past Bortoleto pretty early on, and you could kind of see where it was going. Like, that Sauber was going straight into the wall, and that is exactly where he went. He was able to come out, make his way over to the pits, and continue the race, but it was pretty obvious where that was gonna go. There was actually an interesting moment during this race where Haas was doing a pit stop and they were like running around with the tires. I was like, what the heck is going on here? That is not what a normal pit stop should look like. And we're gonna get more and more into that during the technical tidbit today. Gasly ran into the back of Tsunoda at one point and basically lost his entire front tire, his brakes. I was trying to understand exactly what happened in that moment. It seemed like maybe he lost his brakes and then he ran into Tsunoda. I couldn't tell whether it was like that kind of situation or whether he ran into Tsunoda and then he was like, oh, I have no brakes, which, wow, surprising. You also like didn't really have a wheel attached anymore, so probably makes sense that you wouldn't have brakes. Anyway, for some reason then, Gasly drove all the way back to the pits and like dragged debris everywhere, which was an interesting choice as well. And then, as I mentioned, the Racing Bulls pulled off that whole one person go slow, one person go quick strategy, and Hadjar got both of his stops done pretty early on in the race. There was a little bit of an interesting excitement happening with the front runners. They pitted Piastri a little bit earlier in an attempt to undercut Leclerc and try to get Piastri out in front of Leclerc, but they had a little bit of a slower pit stop than they were probably hoping for, so they were not able to capitalize on that. Max Verstappen also had a funny one on the radio where he was basically like, my shifts feel like the Monaco Grand Prix 1972, which the commentators were saying basically just meant that it's manual shifting, which is a lot harder than what they're actually doing in those cars. So kind of crazy to think about that. All of the front runners were overtaking the back people. There was a lot of lapping going on, and I thought it was kind of funny because they would wave the blue flag to have people let the front runners through as they should, and Behrman was really trying to use that as his opportunity to also push through. It kind of made me think of those people on the freeway whenever it's like a police car that comes through and everyone pulls over and then somebody like trails behind them. I was like, that's kind of what this is giving right now. But it's racing, so I guess props to Behrman as long as that's allowed. Also, poor Fernando Alonso. Last week he was complaining about being the unluckiest driver in the world, which I did not want to give to him at the time because he is a two-time world champion. Like, he's not like unlucky, but like this felt unlucky. He is like one of the only people on that grid to not score points yet this season, and his car just broke down. It's just like, why? He should have been finishing that race. It looked like guaranteed points for the Aston Martin, and it just gave out, and that sucks. And then going back to their Mercedes, George Russell was so impatient, and I cannot blame him with this whole Williams strategy situation thing. At one point, Russell said, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And he just cut the track limits, completely skipped a turn so that he could get ahead of Alex Albon and he could just go. And honestly, I don't blame him. Like, at least that gave me something to talk about because that was crazy how annoying it must have been for Russell to literally just be like, I'm not doing this anymore, and to then go straight off and away. And obviously stewards did not like the fact that he did that. He got a pretty major penalty of having to do a drive-through in the pits, which is like a lot. But it was kind of interesting because after the race, Russell was like, that was stupid. Like, the race was stupid. Like, I didn't have anything to lose. I may as well just go, so I'm at least having some kind of entertainment and some kind of fun. It's like, honestly, valid. Even the two Williams drivers were like, yeah, that wasn't ideal. We didn't really like that strategy. We didn't want to be going slow either. And it was actually kind of funny because it almost looked like Antonelli did the exact same thing as Russell like 2 laps later after Russell had already gotten the penalty for it. So I was about to be like, wow, Mercedes had just literally given up here. But it actually, I think they replayed a replay and it looked like he actually hit a wall and then just like lost control of the car, and he did give the place back. So even though he also cut the same corner, he gave the place back. Verstappen waited until the very last lap of the race to do his pit stop in hopes that there would be a red flag or something that would enable him to keep his position at the front of the grid, because he was running in first for most of the Grand Prix, but he needed to complete that second pit stop. Leading up to Verstappen leaving, it looked like Leclerc might have had a chance of overtaking Norris. He was getting really, 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 really close to him, but again, it's just like this track does not allow that to happen very much. And as soon as Verstappen disappeared and went into the pits, Norris flew away. It was very clear that he had the pace. Verstappen was holding him up. He was well away of Leclerc by the end of that Grand Prix. So, finishing lineup for this race, we had Lando Norris in first, Leclerc second, and Piastri third. Poor Leclerc definitely seemed a little bit disappointed, but I was just happy to have those Ferraris a little bit higher up, because in fourth we had Verstappen, fifth was Hamilton, in sixth we had Hadjar, seventh Ocon, eighth Lawson, then we had Albon, Sainz, Russell, Behrman, Colapinto, Bortoleto, Stroll, Hulkenberg, Tsunoda, Antonelli, and we had Alonso and Gasly, who DNF'd. Moving in to talking about our technical tidbit for this week, as I mentioned, I want to talk all things pit stops. And obviously pit stops have always been relatively speedy, but they are significantly faster today than where they used to be. So back in the 1950s, there'd be probably around just over a minute. By the 1980s, we were looking at about 10 seconds. And then since then, we have steadily gone lower and lower to today where we are at about 2 seconds. There are approximately 20 people involved in a single pit stop, and it is very much a choreographed dance. Like, they practice this over and over and over again to try to get this as efficient as possible, to make sure that everybody understands what they need to be doing and to also account for any issues or things that may come up. So first of all, we have the 4 people who are responsible for each tire who have the tire gun. And these wheel guns are actually really interesting. So they're pneumatic wheel guns, and they are basically powered. There's either like compressed air or nitrogen in there that tries to make this as quick as possible. It gives it a ton of torque. Over 10,000 RPM of torque are available in these guns, which is obviously way faster, way stronger than anything you just see in like a typical garage. Each of the tires on a Formula One car is held in place by a single central locking nut on each wheel, and each gun can remove and tighten that wheel nut in under half a second. It's designed to come off very quickly with a quick twist and then lock right in place with an audible sound to alert the person doing the tires that it is done. They also have color-coded and sensor-assisted systems, so they signal to the crew whether the nut is fully tightened or not. It kind of depends on the team. Some of them have a dual trigger system, whether they're locking or loosening the wheel, whereas other ones have an auto reverse logic built into them, so that as soon as they're done loosening the tire and then they put the other one on, it's automatically going to go the other direction, which saves them milliseconds, which is not a lot, but in these 2-second ones, these are kind of high stakes. So then you have 4 people who pull the tires off, you have 4 people who put the new tires back on the car, then you have somebody responsible for jacking up the front and the back of the car, and in addition to the 2 people who you have doing that, you also have 2 spare people for that, in case something goes wrong, like if somebody falls over or something, you have somebody else there ready to go. You also have 2 people on the side who stabilize the sides or have side jacks as well. So like if the car comes into the pits and it's a front wing is all in disarray and is damaged, then you have to use the side jacks to get that car up to be able to replace that. You also have a couple of aerodynamic specialists who would need to come out again if there's some kind of issue with that aerodynamics, and they can also adjust like the slits in the front of the car as well to change depending on what the driver needs for oversteer, understeer, etc. There's also one lollipop man or traffic controller, which is often automated as well now with a light system, but I think that they usually have a person who is kind of a double check for that. And then of course you have extra support crew. There's going to be somebody nearby with a fire extinguisher for sure, just checking on the car, having a look, making sure that everything is going well, trying to stay there in case anything else may be needed. There are a couple of ways that things can go wrong whenever there is a pit stop. I think one of the most common ones that we tend to see on our screen is whenever there are unsafe releases where they say, yep, it's good to go, but maybe there's somebody else who is coming down the pit lane or whatever, and it wasn't actually a good time for them to leave. There can also be jack failures if they can't get the jack slotted into the car in the right way. The car is designed, obviously, to consider the jack and to make that as easy and quickly as possible that they can do that. So if something goes wrong or there's something stuck there or something, then they can't get the jack in, then that is also a common thing that can go wrong. Another one is where the wheel nut just can't come off, which is not good, and it has actually led to people having to retire from the race because they simply can't get this nut off of the car. That actually happened to Bottas at Monaco in 2021, so definitely less than ideal. And then you also run the risk of a tire not being properly attached, which is obviously quite unsafe and can also just result in penalties for the team. Everything that they build on the car as well is going to be modular so that they are able to quickly and easily assemble the car whenever things go wrong. That's why you can see them replacing like the front wing in the middle of a pit stop. It's because they have designed that car to easily be able to take it apart and put it back together again, which is pretty crazy, especially when you think about how strong these cars are as well. They're actually really lightweight in a lot of ways. but that doesn't mean that they aren't also going to be strong, and that's where, carbon fiber and things like that come into play. Everything is super precise so that they're able to put things on without having to fiddle with it, without having to spend time on it that they just don't have time for, because a slow pit stop can make or break a race for a driver. You spend more than a couple seconds in there and you have lost so much time on track. It could be many positions on the grid and you're just out of luck. For the final segment of today's podcast, we're going to be talking through a preview for the Spanish Grand Prix this weekend. And this is one of the most well-known circuits in Formula One. It's been on the calendar since 1991, and it's also a very popular testing spot. So this year, I believe we did our testing in Bahrain, but Spain has done the preseason testing for many years because it has a little bit of everything. It has high-speed corners, it has a long straight, it has some more technical sections. And so if your car does well in Spain, you're probably going to be in luck in a lot of the other tracks. It is located just outside of Barcelona. The track is 4.6 kilometers, which is about 2.9 miles. There are 66 laps and 2 DRS zones, which we love a good DRS zone. Michael Schumacher holds the record for most wins with 6, and the current lap record is held by Max Verstappen with 1:18.149, which is set in 2023. Speaking of Verstappen, he also won his first ever Formula One race here in 2016, 18 years old, whenever he was promoted from Toro Rosso up to the Red Bull team. That was also a crazy race. We had Hamilton and Rosberg crashing out in the first lap, which is just thrilling. Obviously, we're going to be keeping an eye out for tire degradation, especially because it's hot there. There's a lot of high-speed corners, so turn 3 and turn 13, they really chew up the tires, so it'll probably be a 2-stop race. Another exciting previous moment at this track includes Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna when they had basically an eyeball-to-eyeball drag race at the end of the straight before Mansell was able to take the lead and drive to victory. So get ready, hopefully, for a pretty exciting Spanish Grand Prix. Can't wait to recap the race with you next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure to subscribe if you are watching on YouTube, or rate this podcast and follow along if you are listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Check us out on Instagram at Grid Girls Formula. And I just want to say thank you guys so much for listening. I love reading your comments as well. It's really sweet, the kinds of things that you guys say to me, and I'm just so glad that you are enjoying the podcast. And yeah, if you have any recommendations or anything that you want me to talk about in the future, then please let me know, because I love hearing from you guys. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye!